Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that would make your worst dinner party experience look like a quaint tea gathering. We're diving deep into the world of Roman dinner parties, or as they called them, convivia, and trust me, whatever mental image Hollywood has painted for you about elegant Romans reclining gracefully while eating grapes, you need to toss that right out the window. The reality was so much more bizarre, disgusting, and frankly disturbing than anything your imagination could conjure up. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world, especially when we're about to explore something this wonderfully revolting together. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and prepare yourself for a journey that will forever change how you think about dinner invitations. Because what we're about to discover isn't just about food. It's about power, status, excess, and human behavior at its most unrestrained. And let's ease into tonight's journey together, starting with a simple question. What happens when you give unlimited wealth and power to people who believe the gods themselves indulge in every earthly pleasure? The answer, my friends, is absolutely spectacular in the worst possible way. The invitation you never want to receive. Picture this. You're a reasonably well-off Roman citizen living in the 1st century AD. Maybe you own a small business. Maybe you've got some political connections. Life is good. Your slaves are obedient, your villa is comfortable, and you're finally starting to climb that social ladder that every Roman obsesses over. Then one day, a messenger arrives at your door, carrying a small wax tablet with an invitation that makes your blood run cold. The invitation is from Marcus Junius Brutus, not the famous one who stabbed Caesar, but his great-nephew, a man whose wealth could buy entire provinces and whose dinner parties are legendary throughout Rome for all the wrong reasons. The tablet is elegantly carved, probably worth more than most people make in a year, and the message is deceptively simple. Your presence is requested at my home for an evening of dining and entertainment. The 9th hour, 3 days hence. You know, you can't refuse. This isn't really an invitation. It's a summons. Declining would be social suicide, political destruction, and possibly literal death, depending on Brutus's mood that week. But accepting means subjecting yourself to horrors that will haunt your dreams for years to come. This is the terrible paradox of Roman high society. The very thing that could elevate your status might also destroy your soul. As you hold that tablet, your hands probably shake a little. You've heard the stories. Everyone has. Whispered accounts of what happens behind the marble walls of the wealthy elite. Stories so outrageous that surely they must be exaggerated. People talk about dining tables that literally collapse under the weight of excess food. They speak of entertainment so depraved that even hardened soldiers refuse to describe it in detail. They mention guests who arrive as respected citizens and leave as broken shells of their former selves. But you're about to discover that the stories, if anything, don't go far enough. The reality of a Roman elite dinner party wasn't just excessive. It was a carefully orchestrated theater of human degradation, designed to remind everyone present exactly where they stood in the brutal hierarchy of Roman society. Every course served, every entertainment provided, every humiliation witnessed was a calculated demonstration of power. The worst part? You have exactly 3 days to prepare yourself mentally for an experience that no amount of preparation could possibly make bearable. 3 days to wonder what role you'll be expected to play in this sick theater. Will you be a participant? An observer? Or worse, will you become part of the entertainment yourself? As you set the tablet down, you realize something that makes your stomach turn. You're not just attending a dinner party. You're entering a world where every human boundary has been not just crossed, but obliterated entirely. Where the line between civilization and barbarism doesn't just blur, it disappears completely. And the most terrifying part of all, deep down, beneath your horror and revulsion, there's a tiny part of you that's curious. A small voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, you want to see how far human excess can actually go. That voice, that curiosity, is exactly what makes these gatherings so dangerous. Because once you've seen what lies beyond the boundaries of normal human behavior, you can never quite unsee it. The countdown begins now. 3 days until you discover that everything you thought you knew about civilization, about limits, about human nature itself, was nothing more than a comfortable lie you told yourself to sleep at night. Preparing for depravity, the 3 days before hell. The moment you accept that invitation, your entire household shifts into a mode of controlled panic that would be almost comical if it weren't so genuinely terrifying. Your first stop is your personal slave, Marcus, who's been with your family for 15 years and knows more about navigating Roman social disasters than most senators. When you show him the invitation, his face goes completely white, and Marcus has seen everything from gladiator fights to public executions without flinching. "Master," he says, his voice barely above a whisper, "are you certain you want to attend this particular gathering?" The way he emphasizes particular tells you everything you need to know. This isn't just any dinner party. This is one of those dinner parties, the kind that gets whispered about in bathhouses and forgotten by morning because no decent person wants to remember they exist. Your first day of preparation involves a trip to the public baths, but not for the usual reasons. You need information, and the baths are where information flows more freely than the heated water. You slip into conversations, listen to fragments of gossip, piece together what you can about what awaits you. What you discover makes you wish you'd never learned to read that invitation in the first place. A merchant who attended one of Brutus's gatherings 6 months ago still won't eat lying down. He sits upright at every meal, his eyes constantly scanning the room as if expecting something terrible to emerge from the shadows. A senator's son who went to a similar party has developed a permanent stutter and refuses to touch wine of any kind. These aren't just people who had a bad evening. These are people who've been fundamentally changed by whatever they witnessed. The second day brings the practical preparations, and here's where things get truly bizarre. Your wardrobe slave, a usually chatty Greek named Philemon, approaches you with an expression you've never seen before, something between pity and terror. He's holding your finest toga, the one reserved for the most important social occasions, but he's also carrying something else. A small vial of olive oil and what appears to be a leather undergarment you've never seen before. "Master," Philemon says, unable to meet your eyes, "there are certain ... protections that experienced guests recommend for these particular evenings." He won't elaborate no matter how much you press him, but the way his hands shake as he handles that leather garment tells you everything you need to know about what kind of entertainment you might encounter. Your wife, normally the picture of Roman dignity, has been weeping quietly for 2 days. She won't tell you why, but you catch her burning incense at the household shrine with an intensity that borders on desperation. When you ask her what's wrong, she just looks at you with an expression that seems to say goodbye. Not "see you later, goodbye," but the kind of goodbye you give someone you might never see again, or who might return so changed that they're essentially a different person. The third day is when the real horror sets in, because this is when the preparations become specific. A package arrives at your door, delivered by one of Brutus's personal slaves, a young man whose eyes hold an emptiness that chills you to the bone. Inside the package are detailed instructions about what to wear, what not to wear, what to expect, and what is expected of you. The instructions are written in the casual tone you might use to describe a typical evening with friends, but the content is absolutely nightmarish. You're told to eat lightly for 3 days beforehand, because digestive distress during the evening's festivities can be quite unpleasant for all involved. You're advised to prepare yourself mentally for sights and sounds that may challenge your conventional understanding of entertainment. Most disturbing of all, you're given a small bronze token and told that should you find the evening's proceedings beyond your tolerance, present this token to any household slave, who will escort you to a quiet room where you may recover before departing. That token, innocent as it looks, is essentially an admission that what you're about to witness is so extreme that even hardened Romans need an escape route. The fact that they've institutionalized a system for guests who can't handle the evening tells you more about what awaits than any explicit description ever could. As the sun sets on that third day, you find yourself standing in your villa's courtyard, dressed in your finest clothes, but feeling like you're wearing a funeral shroud. Your household slaves gather around you, with expressions typically reserved for sending someone off to war, because in a way, that's exactly what's happening. You're going to war against your own humanity, your own moral boundaries, your own understanding of what civilized people do behind closed doors. The worst part is that you still don't know exactly what you're walking into. All you know is that whatever happens tonight will change you forever, and not in a good way. Entering the gates of excess, the approach to Brutus's villa is designed to intimidate, and it works perfectly. As your litter carriers bring you up the marble-paved road that leads to his estate, you pass through 3 separate gateways, each more ornate and forbidding than the last. The first gate is decorated with scenes from mythology, but not the sanitized versions you learned about in school. These are the dark myths, the ones involving transformation, violation, and divine punishment. Painted in vivid detail across the marble archway are images that make you look away instinctively, even though you know they're just artistic representations. The second gate is where things get personal. Posted on either side are bronze plaques listing the names of every guest who has attended Brutus's parties in the past year. It's a roll call of Roman high society, but it's also something more sinister, a record of complicity. Seeing your own social circle represented here, names you recognize from the Senate, from the courts, from your own dinner table, makes you realize that what you're about to experience isn't some isolated aberration. This is how your society actually functions when nobody's watching. But it's the third gate that truly prepares you for what lies ahead. Here, the decorations aren't mythological or symbolic. They're documentary. Carved into the marble with photographic precision are scenes from actual previous parties. You see Romans you recognize, people whose reputations are built on dignity and moral authority, engaged in activities that would make seasoned prostitutes blush. The message is clear. Everyone compromises themselves here, and everyone goes home knowing that everyone else knows exactly who they really are. As you pass through that final gateway, the sounds hit you first. What you expected was perhaps elegant music, the refined conversation of educated Romans, maybe the gentle splash of fountain water. What you actually hear is something that makes your skin crawl, a combination of music, laughter, and other sounds that your brain doesn't want to process. It's the audio signature of humanity unleashed from all constraints, and it's both fascinating and revolting. The villa itself is a masterpiece of architecture designed specifically for depravity. The main dining hall is circular, with a sunken center where the actual dining takes place, surrounded by raised galleries where observers can watch the proceedings. Every sightline has been carefully calculated to ensure that nothing, absolutely nothing, can remain private. The ceiling is a work of art that depicts the Roman pantheon engaged in every conceivable form of excess, serving as both decoration and instruction manual for the evening's activities. Your first glimpse of the other guests confirms your worst fears. These aren't people attending a party. They're people who have surrendered their humanity at the door. Senators who command legions across the empire are crawling on their hands and knees, wearing nothing but jeweled collars. Wealthy matrons whose opinions shape Roman society are performing acts that would scandalize the most hardened street workers. Young aristocrats whose families trace their lineage back to the founding of Rome are competing with each other to see who can debase themselves most thoroughly. But here's what makes it truly horrifying. They're all enjoying it. This isn't coercion in the traditional sense. This is what happens when people with unlimited power and wealth decide that conventional morality is just another constraint to be discarded. They've chosen this. They've embraced it. And now they're expecting you to join them. A slave approaches you, not one of the broken, empty-eyed servants you expected, but someone who moves with confidence and authority. His role becomes immediately clear. He's your guide through hell, the person whose job is to ensure you understand exactly what's expected of you and exactly what will happen if you fail to meet those expectations. His smile is warm, his manner friendly, and his eyes contain depths of cruelty that make your blood freeze. "Welcome," he says, his voice carrying easily over the sounds of revelry. "You must be our newest guest. Allow me to explain how the evening will proceed." What follows is a detailed description of the night's entertainment. That makes you understand why they provide those bronze tokens for early departure. This isn't just dinner and a show. This is a carefully orchestrated descent into every form of human degradation imaginable, with each course of the meal accompanied by increasingly extreme forms of entertainment. As he speaks, you realize that you've crossed a threshold from which there's no real return. Even if you use that token, even if you leave right now, you've seen enough to understand what lies beneath the surface of Roman civilization. You've learned that the people who rule your world, who make the laws and command the armies and shape the culture, are capable of things that would make demons envious. The question now isn't whether you'll be forever changed by this experience. That's already happened. The question is whether you'll have enough of your soul left when the night is over to remember who you used to be. The feast begins when food becomes performance art. The first course arrives, and immediately you understand that everything you thought you knew about Roman cuisine, about dining, about food itself, was hopelessly naive. What's placed before you isn't just a meal. It's a statement, a challenge, and a test all rolled into one dish that shouldn't exist in any civilized world. The centerpiece is what Brutus cheerfully announces as newborn peacocks stuffed with the tongues of 100 nightingales. But that's just the beginning of its horror. The bird has been prepared in such a way that its eyes still move, following the guests around the room through some nightmare combination of fresh preparation and skilled preservation. Its feathers have been replaced with thin sheets of gold that rustles with every slight movement, creating a sound like whispered screams. But the real shock comes when you realize that the peacock is still alive. Barely, impossibly, but alive. The preparation method, which the chef describes in loving detail, involves keeping the creature conscious right up until the moment of serving, so that its suffering becomes part of the flavor. The Romans around you nod appreciatively at this innovation, as if this level of cruelty is not just acceptable, but admirable. You watch senators and wealthy merchants tear into this abomination with obvious relish, and you realize that what you're witnessing isn't just extreme cuisine. It's a deliberate cultivation of callousness. The side dishes are worse. Small songbirds that have been force-fed until their livers expanded to 5 times normal size, then cooked alive in their own fat while their hearts still beat. Oysters that have been kept alive in tanks filled with the tears of slaves. And yes, they actually collected slave tears for this purpose, using methods you don't want to think about. Fruits that have been cultivated in soil fertilized with human remains, giving them a flavor that's supposed to carry the essence of mortality. As you force yourself to take small bites, refusing to eat would be a deadly insult. You notice that the other guests aren't just eating this food. They're performing with it. A respected magistrate is feeding pieces of the peacock to a naked slave girl while describing exactly what he plans to do to her later. A senator's wife is making obscene sounds while eating the force-fed songbirds. Her performance so explicit that even the most hardened guests are staring. This isn't dining, it's theater, and the goal is to see who can be most shocking, most degraded, most inhuman. The servants moving between the tables are part of the performance too. They're not just bringing food. They're providing their own form of entertainment that makes the meal service into something approaching a horror show. Young slaves, clearly chosen for their physical beauty, serve the courses while enduring treatment that would be criminal in any other context. Their suffering is as carefully orchestrated as the menu. designed to add an extra layer of depravity to every bite. But here's where it gets truly disturbing: the conversation. While all this is happening, while guests are tearing into creatures that shouldn't exist and watching human beings be degraded for their amusement, they're having perfectly normal dinner party conversation. They discuss politics, philosophy, literature, art. A man who just fed live insects to a slave child is now giving an eloquent discourse on the nature of virtue in Stoic philosophy. A woman who used a serving knife to inflict casual cruelty on a servant is debating the finer points of poetry with the same passion she just showed for causing pain. This casual juxtaposition of refinement and brutality is more unsettling than either element alone. It reveals something fundamental about these people. They don't see a contradiction between their cultured personas and their monstrous actions. In their minds, being civilized doesn't mean being moral. It means having the power and sophistication to indulge every impulse without consequences. As the first course winds down, you realize that your fellow guests are studying you as much as they're enjoying their food. They're watching to see how you react, how much you participate, how far you're willing to go to fit in. Your responses are being cataloged, evaluated, stored away for future use. Every expression of disgust, every moment of hesitation, every sign of moral resistance is noted by people who see such reactions as either amusing weaknesses or dangerous rebellions. The evening is just beginning, and already you understand that this isn't really about food at all. It's about power. The power to destroy beauty, to corrupt innocence, to force good people to witness evil and call it entertainment. The meal is just a delivery system for a much more sinister form of nourishment. The feeding of souls that have grown so hungry for degradation that ordinary human pleasure can no longer satisfy them. And the worst part? You can feel it working on you already. With each bite, each witnessed act of cruelty, each moment of complicit silence, you feel something inside you changing. The person who walked through those gates an hour ago wouldn't recognize the person who's sitting here now, calmly eating abomination while watching innocence be destroyed for sport. The entertainment begins. Humanity a spectacle between the first and second courses. The tables are cleared away to make room for what Brutus announces as a small diversion to aid digestion. What follows makes you understand why some cultures believe that certain sights can literally damn a soul, because what you're about to witness will brand itself into your memory so deeply that you'll carry it with you to your grave. The entertainment space in the center of the dining hall transforms with practiced efficiency. Servants wheel an apparatus that looks like a combination of playground equipment and torture. Devices, structures clearly designed for human use, but in ways that nature never intended. The lighting changes from warm and welcoming to stark and theatrical, casting shadows that seem to move independently of their sources. Even the air feels different, charged with anticipation and malice. The first performers are brought in, and immediately you realize that the word performers is inadequate for what these people have become. They're not actors playing roles, they're human beings who have been so thoroughly broken and reshaped that they exist solely to embody the darkest fantasies of the Roman elite. A young man who might once have been a soldier or a merchant now moves like a trained animal, responding to subtle hand signals from his handlers. A woman who clearly came from a respectable family, you can tell by her bone structure, her posture, the way she unconsciously maintains certain dignified gestures, even in her current state, has been transformed into something that serves purposes you don't want to understand. But it's not just the individual performers that horrify you. It's the systematic nature of their transformation. This isn't random cruelty or spontaneous degradation. This is an industry, a carefully developed process for taking human beings and turning them into living embodiments of depravity. Someone has spent considerable time, effort, and resources to create these entertainers, which means there's a market for this level of human destruction. People are willing to pay premium prices to watch souls being systematically dismantled. The actual performances defy description, not because they're too complex to understand, but because your mind actively resists processing what your eyes are seeing. Acts that combine physical contortion with psychological humiliation, performed by people who have clearly been trained to derive genuine pleasure from their own degradation. The skill level is remarkable. These aren't amateurs being forced to participate in something they hate. These are professionals who have mastered the art of public self-destruction. What makes it worse is the audience participation. The Roman guests aren't passive observers. They're directing the action, calling out suggestions, making requests, essentially custom ordering their preferred forms of human degradation in real time. A senator you've seen giving speeches about Roman virtue is now loudly detailing exactly what he wants to see happen to a performer who can't be more than 16 years old. A magistrate's wife is placing bets on which performer will break first under increasingly extreme demands. The performers respond to these requests with what appears to be genuine enthusiasm, but you begin to notice subtle signs that suggest otherwise. Micro-expressions that flash across their faces when they think no one is looking. Brief moments where their trained responses falter, and something more human shows through. These people haven't chosen this life. They've been shaped into it so thoroughly that they can no longer remember having a choice. As the entertainment intensifies, you notice something that makes your blood run cold. Some of the performers are people you recognize. That young man who's being subjected to particularly creative forms of humiliation. You've seen him at the baths, heard him discussing philosophy with other young aristocrats. That woman who's demonstrating flexibility that should be anatomically impossible. She used to serve wine at dinner parties, hosted by your own social circle. These aren't just random people who've been broken for entertainment. These are members of your own class who have fallen from grace so completely that they've become objects for the amusement of their former equals. The implications hit you like a physical blow. This could be you. One wrong political move, one financial disaster, one moment of crossing the wrong person, and you could find yourself down there in that performance space. Your former friends and colleagues calling out increasingly degrading requests while placing bets on your endurance. The boundary between audience and entertainment isn't fixed. It's temporary, conditional, and subject to change based on forces completely outside your control. But perhaps most disturbing of all is your own reaction. Despite your horror, despite your revulsion, despite every moral instinct screaming that this is wrong, you find yourself watching with fascination. There's something hypnotic about seeing human boundaries push so far beyond their breaking point. Part of you, a part you didn't know existed until tonight, is genuinely curious about how far this can go. What ultimate extremes of human experience are possible when all constraints are removed? This internal conflict is perhaps the real entertainment for your hosts. They're not just watching the performers. They're watching you, studying your face as you struggle between revulsion and fascination, documenting the precise moment when your moral compass begins to spin wildly before settling on a new heading entirely. Your inner turmoil is as much a part of the evening's program as anything happening in that performance space. As this first round of entertainment winds down, you realize that everything so far has been preparation. The food wasn't really about nutrition. It was about breaking down your natural resistance to witnessing suffering. The performances weren't really about entertainment. They were about establishing new baselines for what counts as acceptable human behavior. You're being systematically reprogrammed, and the most terrifying part is that it's working. The vomitorium, where gluttony meets performance art. As the evening progresses, you're introduced to one of the most infamous aspects of Roman elite dining culture, and it's somehow worse than anything you've heard whispered about in the bathhouses. The vomitorium, that special room attached to every wealthy Romang's dining area, isn't just a practical necessity for managing excessive consumption. It's been transformed into its own form of entertainment venue, complete with elaborate decoration, specialized servants, and rituals to make the simple act of emptying one's stomach into high theater. The room itself is a marvel of perverted engineering. Marble floors inlaid with mosaics depicting the cycle of consumption and expulsion, carved in detail so graphic that they serve as both art and instruction manual. The walls are lined with specially designed couches that position the body for optimal purging while maintaining the dignity that Romans prize so highly, because even when vomiting, a Roman aristocrat must do so with proper form and elegance. But it's not just the physical space that's been elevated to an art form. It's the entire process. Specialized slaves, trained specifically for this purpose, assist guests in the purging process with techniques that transform a usually private and unpleasant necessity into something approaching a religious ritual. They know exactly how to position the body, which pressure points to massage, which herbal preparations to administer, to make the experience as efficient and painless as possible. What makes this particularly disturbing is the social aspect. In most cultures, vomiting is a private affair, something done out of necessity, but certainly not celebrated. Here, it's communal. Groups of guests retire to the vomitorium together, continuing their dinner conversation while emptying their stomachs, treating the entire process as just another form of social interaction. You watch respected senators discussing military strategy while projectile vomiting, their tone and manner exactly the same as if they were debating the finer points of rhetoric in the forum. The servants who assist in this process have developed their own specialized skills that border on the supernatural. They can predict exactly when someone is ready to purge, position the appropriate receptacles with split-second timing, and provide just the right amount of physical support to make the experience as comfortable as possible. Some of them have even developed diagnostic abilities. They can tell by subtle changes in breathing, posture, or facial expression exactly what kind of assistance will be needed and when. But here's where it gets truly bizarre. The purging process has been gamified. Guests compete to see who can empty their stomachs most efficiently, most elegantly, most completely. There are informal scoring systems based on technique, volume, and recovery time. Winners receive small prizes, usually in the form of access to exclusive entertainments. Later in the evening, while losers face good-natured mockery that sometimes turns genuinely cruel, you find yourself participating in this ritual not because you want to, but because refusing would mark you as hopelessly provincial, someone who doesn't understand how sophisticated Romans handle the demands of serious dining. As you assume the position on one of those marble couches, with a trained slave positioning your body and providing encouraging whispers about technique and timing, you realize that you're not just emptying your stomach. You're emptying yourself of another piece of the person you used to be. The substances that come up aren't just food. They're visual evidence of the evening's excess. You see partially digested pieces of those impossible dishes, ingredients that shouldn't exist combined in ways that nature never intended. The very act of expelling this material feels like purging yourself of poison. But you know you'll be returning to the dining area to consume even more elaborate abominations. This isn't relief. It's preparation for greater excess. What's most unsettling is how normal this all feels after the first few minutes. The initial revulsion gives way to acceptance, then to something approaching appreciation for the efficiency and sophistication of the system. You begin to understand why the Romans developed this practice. When consumption becomes an art form, purging must become one too. It's not about gluttony in the simple sense. It's about pushing the boundaries of human experience, seeing how far the body can be made to serve desires that go far beyond basic nutrition. The conversations during these purging sessions reveal aspects of Roman society that would shock even the most cynical observer. Business deals are struck between senators while they're vomiting. Political alliances are formed while distinguished citizens are hunched over marble receptacles. Marriage contracts are negotiated while wealthy matrons are demonstrating purging techniques to their daughters. This is where the real business of the Roman elite gets conducted, not in the formal settings of the forum or the Senate, but in moments of shared vulnerability that create bonds stronger than any public ceremony. As you clean yourself up and prepare to return to the dining area, you catch sight of your reflection in one of the polished bronze mirrors that line the vomitorium walls. The person looking back at you is someone you don't entirely recognize. Still you, but changed in ways that go deeper than just physical appearance. Your eyes hold knowledge they didn't have an hour ago. Your posture carries a subtle understanding of human capacity for degradation that wasn't there before. You've been inducted into secrets that can never be unlearned. And the most terrifying realization of all? You're already looking forward to the next course. The sexual marketplace, where bodies become currency after the vomitorium interlude. The evening takes a turn that makes everything you've witnessed so far seem almost quaint by comparison. What emerges is a systematic marketplace for human sexuality that operates with the efficiency of a grain exchange and the casual brutality of a gladiator match. This isn't the random debauchery you might expect from wealthy Romans with too much wine and too few moral constraints. This is organized, institutionalized, and run with business-like precision. The transformation of the dining space happens quickly and with practiced efficiency. Servants rearrange the furniture to create distinct areas, each designed for different categories of transaction. There are spaces for negotiation, areas for demonstration, and private alcoves for consummation. The entire process is overseen by what can only be described as sexual commerce managers, experienced slaves, who understand both the desires of the Roman elite and the capabilities of the merchandise being offered. What shocks you most isn't the existence of this marketplace. You knew. Romans bought and sold sexual services, but the sophistication of the system. There are catalogs, detailed descriptions of available services, pricing structures that vary based on the specific acts requested and the social status of both buyer and seller. Some of the merchandise consists of traditional slaves, but much of it involves free Romans who have fallen into debt, face political disgrace, or simply discovered that they can earn more money selling their bodies than pursuing conventional careers. The negotiations you witness are conducted with the same seriousness that Romans bring to any important business transaction. A senator debates the relative merits of different service providers with the same attention to detail he would use when purchasing horses for his estate. A wealthy merchant's wife examines potential partners with the thoroughness of someone selecting jewelry, checking teeth, muscle tone, and other physical attributes while discussing terms and conditions. But it's not just about physical transactions. There's a psychological component that's somehow even more disturbing. Many of the services being offered involve elaborate role-playing scenarios, designed to fulfill fantasies that reveal the darkest aspects of Roman social psychology. Scenarios involving mock executions, simulated family relationships, recreations of historical events with sexual components. The menu of available experiences reads like a catalog of human psychological pathology. You watch a respected magistrate arrange for a scenario that involves recreating the conquest of a barbarian village, complete with authentic costumes, weapons, and victims who will play their roles with method-acting intensity. The senator's wife commissions a complex performance involving multiple participants who will recreate scenes from mythology, with herself cast as a goddess dispensing divine punishment through sexual domination. These aren't simple physical transactions. They're elaborate psychological productions, designed to feed appetites that ordinary human interaction can no longer satisfy. The performers in this marketplace aren't just selling their bodies. They're selling their identities, their personalities, their very sense of self. You witness negotiations where the price includes not just specific physical acts, but agreement to adopt new names, personalities, and even memories for the duration of the transaction. People are literally purchasing the right to temporarily remake other human beings according to their exact specifications. What makes this particularly horrifying is the participation of people you recognize from respectable Roman society. That young patrician who's being inspected like livestock, You've seen him giving speeches about Roman virtue in the Forum. That senator's daughter, who's demonstrating her availability for increasingly extreme services. She was married to a respected consul just 6 months ago. These aren't just society's outcasts being exploited. These are people who were recently your social equals, now reduced to merchandise in humanity's most degraded marketplace. The economic realities driving this system become clear as you listen to the negotiations. Many participants aren't here by choice in any meaningful sense. They're here because Roman society has created economic conditions where selling their bodies and souls is the only viable option for maintaining even basic survival. The same political and social systems that create the wealth necessary to purchase these services also create the desperation that supplies them. But perhaps most disturbing is your own reaction to witnessing this systematic commodification of human sexuality and identity. Despite your initial horror, you find yourself studying the catalogs, listening to the negotiations, even evaluating some of the available services with a detachment that frightens you. The systematic nature of it all, the business-like efficiency, the casual way everyone treats the buying and selling of human dignity. It all starts to seem almost reasonable after prolonged exposure. This normalization process is clearly intentional. By presenting the most extreme forms of human exploitation as just another market transaction, by surrounding it with the familiar trappings of Roman commercial culture, the organizers make it easier for participants to suppress their moral qualms and treat other human beings as commodities. You're not just witnessing depravity. You're being systematically conditioned to accept it as normal, even necessary, part of sophisticated Roman life. As the evening's transactions begin to conclude and participants pair off for their purchased experiences, you realize that you've witnessed something that will fundamentally change how you understand your own society. The civilization you thought you lived in, with its laws, its moral codes, its celebrated values, exists only as a thin veneer over a reality where human beings are treated as interchangeable objects for the amusement of those with sufficient wealth and power. And the most terrifying realization of all? You're beginning to understand why people pay such enormous sums for access to this world. It's not just about the physical pleasures. It's about the intoxicating experience of having godlike power over other human beings. The rush of being able to reshape reality according to your desires without consequences or limitations. The children's hour, when innocence becomes entertainment. What happens next crosses a line so fundamental that even your systematically desensitized mind reels in horror. The evening's entertainment takes a turn that reveals the absolute depths of human moral corruption, involving the participation of children in ways that shouldn't be possible in any civilized society. This isn't just another escalation of adult depravity. This is the deliberate destruction of innocence as a form of sophisticated entertainment. The children who were brought into the dining area aren't random street orphans or captured barbarian slaves. These are Roman children, some from respectable families, others specifically bred and trained for these purposes from infancy. They've been educated, cultured, taught to speak eloquently and move gracefully. Their corruption is all the more shocking because it's overlaid on genuine refinement and sophistication. Watching a 10-year-old discuss philosophy while being prepared for unspeakable purposes creates a cognitive dissonance that makes your brain want to shut down entirely. The systematic nature of their exploitation reveals an infrastructure of evil that goes far beyond individual moral failure. There are training facilities where children are conditioned from early ages to accept and participate in activities that would traumatize normal adults. There are breeding programs designed to produce children with specific physical and psychological characteristics. There are educational curricula specifically designed to create cultured, articulate victims who can enhance their abusers' experiences through intelligent conversation before, during, and after their exploitation. But it's not just the existence of this system that horrifies you. It's the casual way the adult participants discuss it. They debate the relative merits of different training methods with the same tone they might use to discuss horse breeding or vineyard management. They share recommendations for the best facilities, compare notes on techniques that have proven most effective, plan collaborative ventures to develop new approaches to childhood conditioning. This isn't shameful behavior hidden in shadows. This is a recognized industry with established best practices and professional networks. The children themselves display an unnaturally sophisticated understanding of their role. That's more disturbing than any amount of obvious distress would be. They move through the evening's activities with practiced ease, making conversation with adults while participating in activities that should be impossible for minds their age to process. Their training has been so thorough that they've internalized their exploitation as normal, even desirable. They genuinely seem to believe that serving the desires of Roman elites is their highest purpose in life. What makes this particularly soul-crushing is the obvious intelligence and potential of these children. In different circumstances, they could have become philosophers, artists, leaders, contributors to human civilization. Instead, their minds have been weaponized against themselves. Their natural curiosity and eagerness to please twisted into tools for their own destruction. You're watching the systematic waste of human potential on a scale that seems almost cosmically evil. The adult participants' behavior during these activities reveals psychological depths that you didn't know existed. The way they combine genuine affection for the children with utterly selfish exploitation suggests minds that have compartmentalized themselves so thoroughly that they can experience contradictory emotions simultaneously without any sense of internal conflict. They can express paternal concern for a child's education while using that same child for purposes that would destroy any normal person's ability to trust adults ever again. The conversations during these activities are perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all. Adults continue discussing politics, philosophy, literature, and art while engaging in activities that should render such cultured discourse impossible. The casual juxtaposition of intellectual sophistication with moral barbarity creates a surreal atmosphere where civilization and savagery coexist without any apparent contradiction in the participants' minds. As you watch these scenes unfold, you begin to understand something terrible about human nature. Given sufficient power and the right social conditions, people can adapt to absolutely anything. There are no moral boundaries so fundamental that they can't be crossed. No forms of behavior so inherently wrong that they can't be normalized through systematic conditioning. The Romans around you aren't monsters in any traditional sense. They're ordinary people who have been shaped by a culture that places no limits on the exercise of power over the powerless. The children's responses to their treatment reveal the ultimate horror of systematic conditioning. They don't just accept their exploitation, they take pride in it. They compete with each other to provide the most satisfying experiences for their users. They've been trained to derive their sense of self-worth from how successfully they can please adults who are destroying them. Their natural human need for approval and recognition has been twisted into a mechanism for their own dehumanization. But perhaps the most chilling realization comes when you recognize that this system exists because there's demand for it. These activities aren't the result of a few individual perverts operating in isolation. They're the product of a market economy where enough wealthy Romans are willing to pay premium prices for access to corrupted innocence that entire industries have developed to supply that demand. The children you're watching aren't victims of individual crimes. They're products of systemic social choices made by the civilization you live in and have helped to sustain. As this segment of the evening concludes and the children are led away to recovery areas where they'll be prepared for their next performances, you realize that you've witnessed something that has permanently altered your understanding of human capacity for evil. This isn't just about Roman moral corruption. This is about what becomes possible when any society decides that power is more important than protecting the innocent. The breaking point, when spectators become participants as the evening reaches its climax, The carefully maintained boundary between audience and entertainment begins to dissolve in ways that make you understand why some of the previous guests never fully recovered from their experiences here. What you've witnessed so far has been horrifying, but it's also allowed you to maintain the psychological distance of an observer. Now that distance is being systematically eliminated, and you're about to discover what it feels like when the abyss doesn't just stare back at you. It reaches out and pulls you in. The transition happens gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. A servant approaches you with what seemed like a routine request. Would you mind helping to demonstrate a particular dining technique to some of the newer guests? It seems innocent enough. Just a matter of showing proper Roman table manners to people who might not be familiar with elite customs. But as you're guided toward the center of the room, you begin to realize that this demonstration is something else entirely. The technique you're asked to demonstrate involves the use of another human being as a living piece of furniture. Specifically, a young slave who's been positioned to serve as a table while remaining conscious and aware throughout the meal. Your role is to show the proper way to eat while using another person's body as your dining surface, treating them as an object while they struggle to remain motionless despite obvious discomfort and pain. At first, you try to refuse, but the social pressure is overwhelming. Declining would mark you as provincial, unsophisticated, someone who doesn't understand how civilized Romans conduct themselves in refined company. The other guests are watching your reaction carefully, evaluating your worthiness to be part of their circle based on your willingness to participate in this dehumanization. Your future social standing, your political prospects, your family's reputation, everything depends on your compliance with this request. As you reluctantly begin the demonstration, you notice that the other participants are no longer just watching. They're providing commentary, suggestions, critiques of your technique. They're treating your participation in this human degradation as a performance art piece, with themselves as critics evaluating your artistic merit. The casual way they discuss the proper methods for using human beings as furniture, while those same human beings listen to every word, creates an atmosphere of surreal horror that makes reality feel unstable. But this is just the beginning. Once you've demonstrated your willingness to treat other human beings as objects, you're invited to participate in increasingly extreme activities. Each request seems like a small escalation from the previous one, making it difficult to identify a clear point where you should draw the line. The progression is so gradual that before you fully realize what's happening, you find yourself engaging in behaviors that would have horrified you just hours earlier. The psychological manipulation involved in this process is masterful. By starting with seemingly minor compromises and gradually escalating the requests, the organizers bypass your normal moral resistance mechanisms. Each individual action seems only slightly worse than the previous one, making it psychologically easier to rationalize continuing than to suddenly draw a line that would implicitly condemn everything you've already done. You're being led down a slope so gradual that you don't notice how far you've descended until you look back and can no longer see where you started. The other participants encourage your involvement with a combination of praise and subtle threats that keeps you moving forward even as your conscience screams for you to stop. They celebrate each compromise as evidence of your sophistication, your understanding of true Roman values, your worthiness to be part of their exclusive circle. At the same time, they make it clear that backing out now would have serious consequences for your reputation, your relationships, and your future prospects in Roman society. What's most disturbing is your own internal response to this systematic corruption. Despite your horror at what you're doing, despite your awareness that you're betraying every moral principle you once held dear, a part of you is genuinely enjoying the experience. The power, the freedom from normal constraints, the intoxicating sense of being able to do absolutely anything without consequences. It creates a psychological state that's simultaneously terrifying and addictive. As your participation becomes more active and more extreme, You begin to understand why some people voluntarily return to these gatherings, despite knowing what they'll encounter. It's not just about the physical pleasures, or even the social advantages. It's about the psychological experience of existing without limits, of exploring aspects of human nature that civilized society normally keeps carefully controlled. There's something intoxicating about discovering what you're capable of when all restraints are removed. The climax of your participation involves actions that you know will haunt you for the rest of your life, but which you perform anyway because the alternative, acknowledging that you've already gone too far and should have stopped earlier, is psychologically impossible. You're trapped in a logic of escalation where each compromise makes the next one easier to rationalize, until you find yourself doing things that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. As the evening's activities finally wind down and you're allowed to return to the role of observer, you realize that the transformation is complete. You're no longer the person who received that invitation 3 days ago. That person would be horrified by what you've become, but that person no longer exists. In his place is someone who has crossed lines that can never be uncrossed, who has learned things about himself that can never be unlearned, who has participated in activities that have permanently altered his understanding of what human beings are capable of doing to each other. The most terrifying realization of all comes when you understand that this transformation was always the real purpose of the evening. The food, the entertainment, the systematic escalation of depravity. It was all designed to break down your moral resistance and remake you into someone who could comfortably exist in this world of unlimited privilege and unlimited cruelty. You haven't just attended a dinner party. You've undergone a form of initiation that has fundamentally changed who you are. Dawn's reckoning, the morning after hell. As the first pale light of dawn begins to filter through the villa's windows, the evening's festivities finally wind down. But the horror doesn't end. It transforms into something even more disturbing. The casual way everyone begins to clean up and prepare for departure. The normal social pleasantries exchanged between people who just spent the night engaged in systematic human degradation. The polite thanks offered to hosts who orchestrated experiences that would traumatize professional torturers. It all creates a surreal atmosphere that makes you question the nature of reality itself. The cleanup process reveals the industrial scale of the evening's depravity. Specialized servants move through the villa with practiced efficiency, removing evidence, disposing of materials, and restoring the space to its normal, elegant appearance. They work with the same professional competence you might see from servants cleaning up after any social gathering, except that what they're cleaning up are the remnants of activities that challenged every boundary of human decency. Watching them calmly scrub away bloodstains while discussing plans for tomorrow's marketing makes the whole experience feel like a fever dream. The other guests begin to transform back into their normal public personas with a speed that's almost supernatural. People who spent the night engaging in behaviors that would shock seasoned criminals are now adjusting their togas, checking their hair, and preparing to return to their roles as respected members of Roman society. The senator who orchestrated some of the evening's most extreme degradations is now discussing his upcoming speech to the people about moral virtue. The magistrate's wife, who participated in activities that defy description, is planning her attendance at a religious ceremony later that morning. But it's not just the rapid return to normalcy that disturbs you. It's the complete lack of any acknowledgement that anything unusual happened. There are no references to the evening's events, no expressions of regret or second thoughts, no indication that anyone feels they've done anything that requires justification or explanation. This isn't denial or repression. This is genuine compartmentalization so complete that the people who participated in last night's horrors can honestly see themselves as moral, upstanding citizens. As you prepare for your own departure, you catch glimpses of yourself in the villa's many mirrors, and what you see is someone you don't entirely recognize. Physically, you look much the same as when you arrived, but something fundamental has changed in your expression, your posture, your entire presence. You carry yourself like someone who has seen things that can't be unseen, done things that can't be undone, learned truths about human nature that can't be unlearned. The innocence you brought to this place is gone forever, replaced by a knowledge that feels like poison in your soul. The journey home provides time to process what you've experienced, but processing proves impossible because your normal mental categories have been shattered. How do you integrate the memory of participating in systematic human degradation with your self-image as a decent person? How do you reconcile the civilization you thought you lived in with the reality you've just witnessed? How do you continue to interact with people you now know are capable of unimaginable cruelty when given the opportunity? Your household slaves greet your return with expressions that suggest they know exactly where you've been and what you've likely experienced. Their carefully neutral faces, their slightly altered manner of interaction, their subtle changes in posture and tone, it all indicates that participating in one of these gatherings marks you in ways that are visible to those who know how to look. You're no longer just their master. You're someone who has crossed into a world where human beings become objects. And that knowledge changes every relationship you have. The most disturbing aspect of your return home is how quickly everything begins to feel normal again. Within hours, you're back to your usual routines, checking on business matters, reviewing household accounts, discussing social obligations with your wife. The extreme experiences of the previous night begin to feel like something that happened to someone else, or perhaps something you dreamed. This rapid normalization is more frightening than the experiences themselves because it reveals how easily human beings can adapt to absolutely anything when the social context supports it. But the changes in you become apparent in small ways throughout the following days. Your reactions to everyday moral situations are different. Things that once seemed clearly right or wrong now appear more ambiguous. Your tolerance for casual cruelty increases dramatically. Your ability to view other people as fully human decreases in subtle but measurable ways. You find yourself evaluating people in terms of their potential usefulness for various purposes, rather than relating to them as fellow human beings, deserving of basic dignity and respect. Perhaps most disturbing of all, you find yourself looking forward to the next invitation. Despite your horror of what you experienced, despite your awareness of how it changed you, despite your understanding of the moral abyss you've descended into, part of you wants to return. The memory of unlimited power, of freedom from all constraints, of exploring the furthest reaches of human experience. It creates a psychological hunger that normal life can no longer satisfy. As days turn into weeks, you begin to understand that what you experienced wasn't just a single evening of extreme indulgence. It was an initiation into a shadow society that exists parallel to normal Roman civilization. The people who participate in these gatherings don't see them as aberrations or departures from their normal lives. They see them as the most honest expressions of what Roman power and privilege actually mean when stripped of their civilized pretenses. The final horror comes when you realize that the shadow society isn't separate from Roman civilization. It is Roman civilization, at least for those with sufficient wealth and power to access it. The moral codes, the legal systems, the cultural values that ordinary Romans live by aren't limitations on the elite. They're tools for managing the masses, while the real business of exercising unlimited power over human beings continues behind closed doors. You now understand why the Roman Empire can simultaneously produce great art, sophisticated philosophy, and remarkable engineering achievements, while also engaging in systematic brutality that shocks even its contemporaries. It's not a contradiction, it's a division of labor. The masses provide the creativity, the productivity, and the moral justification, while the elite provide the power, the wealth, and the willingness to do absolutely anything necessary to maintain their position. As you settle into your new understanding of how your world actually works, you realize that you can never return to your previous innocence about Roman civilization or human nature. You've seen what lies beneath the surface of every refined conversation, every elegant building, every celebrated achievement. You know what people are capable of when they have sufficient power and the right social context. And most terrifying of all, you know what you yourself are capable of when placed in that same context. The invitation sits on your desk, waiting for your response to the next gathering. And despite everything you've learned about yourself and your society, despite all the horror and degradation you've witnessed and participated in, you find your hand reaching for your stylus to accept. This exploration of Roman elite dinner culture reveals the systematic nature of power-based dehumanization that existed within one of history's most celebrated civilizations. While the specific details may shock modern sensibilities, they serve as a reminder that human capacity for both creation and destruction often coexist within the same societies, separated only by social position and opportunity. The true horror isn't just in the individual acts of cruelty described, but in the systematic way such behaviors become normalized when sufficient power removes all meaningful constraints on human behavior. Understanding these historical realities helps us recognize similar patterns in our own time and work to prevent the conditions that allow such systematic dehumanization to flourish. Sweet dreams.